Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Carla Firstman. I'm the director of the Essex Human Rights Centre, and it's a really great pleasure to welcome all of you to this very special event. By the way, we have about 200 people with us today, so it's really a great pleasure that there's so much interest in this film and in this topic. The Essex Human Rights Centre is a special place which has more than 40-year track record working on cross-cutting human rights issues, bridging the divide between human rights education, research, and practice. Today's event is part of a new independent initiative called the Human Rights Through Art series, Conversations on Cinema, Justice, and Rights. This initiative uses the beauty and power of cinema to recenter the human dimension of rights. The initiative uses films to spark deep conversations on human rights issues across different disciplines. Through compelling movies and open dialogue, we will look at complex human rights issues with fresh eyes. The initiative was developed by human rights professionals with a shared passion for human rights in the arts, with the support of the Human Rights Centre here at Essex. So I would like to introduce my two partners, who are the leaders behind this initiative. First, I'd like to introduce Daniela Barrow. Daniela, welcome, who is a fellow of the Human Rights Centre and a human rights practitioner with a vast experience working in conflict and post-conflict zones all around the world. She's an expert on children's rights, but that is just the start of all of her expertise. Then there is Isabella Castro Giovanni. Welcome, Isabella. Isabella is a child rights and protection practitioner with more than 25 years of international experience, working across humanitarian, development, and conflict settings. The three of us have a long history of collaboration, which spans 30 years, and I'm delighted that we continue to collaborate to this day. But without further ado, I'm going to turn over to Isabella, who will be leading us through this event. Over to you, Isabella.
Thank you very much, Carla, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are joining us from. So I will be moderating today's event, and it's a great pleasure for me to do so. And as Carla mentioned, it's fantastic to see so many of you connected, and so thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to be with us. Today we are turning to cinema again for this conversation on a critical issue, migration, and more specifically, the situation of unaccompanied minors who undertake the dangerous journey across the desert, across the central Mediterranean, in search of a better life. And as we know, tragically, for many, this journey ends in loss, exploitation, or wars. The film we have chosen today to spark this conversation is Io Capitano, Mi Captain, which is a 2023 Oscar-nominated drama directed by Italian film director Matteo Garrone, winner of numerous film awards. It is a movie that follows the story of two young boys who leave Dakar, hoping to reach Europe. The film is really a chilling, I would say, indictment of what I think we should not hesitate calling a modern slave trade and the exploitation economy, the exploitation system behind it. And as we know, sadly, this issue is as urgent and as relevant today as ever, both in Europe and beyond. So just a few words on the way we will structure today's event. We will be screening a few selected excerpts from the film, and then hear from our wonderful guests. We have a fantastic panel, as you will see, whom I also very warmly welcome. Each panelist will have about 10 minutes to answer some questions, and I would really encourage everyone to stay on time so that we we can engage in a conversation with our participants online as well. We will open the floor for discussion at the end of our conversation with the panelists. So stay with us until the end, and hopefully the technology behaves today. So before we start our first screening, which is the official trailer of the film, I would like to invite Daniela to share some key data points that will help us framing or setting the scene for our discussion. So Daniela, over to you.
Thank you, Isabella. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, so I'd like to highlight 3 key issues that prompted us to convene this conversation. First is that millions of children are currently on the move. The UN recorded in 2024 that there were over 300 million people who had migrated, were refugees or asylum seekers, and nearly 40% of them were children. Now, a significant proportion of those children who are moving do so without their parents or legal guardians. You may recall that there was a high peak of unaccompanied, so-called unaccompanied minors in Europe in 2015 and 2016. And that peak has decreased a bit, but still, last year, there were over 21,000 unaccompanied children arriving through different migration routes in Europe alone. Now, a vast majority of these unaccompanied children are actually teenagers. According to Eurostat, 90% of the unaccompanied asylum seekers, minors, who arrived in Europe in the last decade were between 14 and 17 years old, and 90% were boys. Now, a second key issue is that migration has become central to politics these days at the local, national, and regional level. And also migration management policies are increasingly security-driven, prioritizing strict border controls over the protection of human rights. In this regard, I'd like to highlight that human rights organizations have raised concerns about the full protection of children's rights under the EU Pact on Migration and Asylum that is actually coming into force fully in June 2026. And a key concern raised is that the EU Pact on Migration and Asylum allows for the detention of children at the border while they're undergoing screening procedure, asylum border proceeding, or return proceedings, even if in exceptional circumstances. But however, as we may know, human rights bodies have consistently sustained that the detention of children for immigration, solely for immigration reasons, should be prohibited, and it's never in the best interest of children. And then the third key issue that prompted us is that these developments coincide with the global shrinking of humanitarian funding, while the assistance and protection needs of children on the move are still huge. And research has proved that unaccompanied teenagers on the move are at higher risk, are more vulnerable to trafficking and exploitation than adults. Also, states have increasingly, or at least recently, targeted NGOs that are engaged in the search and rescue at sea operations, while IOM has reported that in the last decade, over 25,000 people have died or have gone missing in the central Mediterranean alone. As we will see in the film, the central Mediterranean is considered the deadliest migration route. Already last year, around 98 children died at sea in the central Mediterranean. So the film Io Capitano reminds us that behind all the statistics that I named, there are children with names, with families, with dreams, and with a lot of agency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniela, for really setting the scene and reminding us of what's really at stake from a human rights perspective. So without further ado, may I ask Kat to proceed with the first screen?
Assalamu alaikum voyage, how old are you? I'm
16. Where is your cousin?
We caught him when we were in the desert. If you ever drive the boat, I'll take you and your friend. I'm not capable of driving those big boats. There are a lot of people, there are lives, there are children.
So I personally saw the movie a couple of years ago and found it extremely, extremely powerful and mesmerizing, really. So let's, and I hope that you will have a chance to see it soon. Let me now introduce our first guest, Mamadou Kouassi. Mamadou is an Ivorian immigrant to Italy, whose journey, along with that of other people, works as a cultural mediator in Caserta, southern Italy, and is a very strong advocate of migrants' rights. So, Mamadou, a very warm welcome. I can't see you on the screen, but I hope you are able to hear me. So, Mamadou, are you online? I can't see him online.
Here, he's here.
Okay,
Just,
wonderful.
unmute yourself.
Okay, wonderful. So, Mamadou, welcome again, and thank you very much for taking the time to be with us during, I think, a working day.
Thank you.
Yes, so let me start with this question, Mamadou. As I mentioned, the film is inspired in part by your story, and another boy, your friend Fofana, was the captain of the boat in real life. So can you tell us how did you concretely contribute to the making of this movie? What was your role in the making of the movie? And what was it like? What was it like seeing your personal story, your personal journey portrayed on the big screen? Over to you, Mamadou.
Good afternoon to everybody for who is watching us online. For me, it's a great opportunity to, after 2 years, this movie is talking about migration, it's talking about human rights, it's talking about slavery, and at the same time, because it's talking about also dreams. All of us have dreams. And me and my cousin, we decided to move to Europe because in Africa, in our continent, the only way most of the time for us to move to Europe is to travel across the desert, the Mediterranean Sea. And I'm lucky. I'm lucky, and because I spent 3 years before arriving in Europe, in Italy here. The journey took me 2 months to arrive in Libya, and in Libya I have been there for 3 years. So when I got Italy, and I met Matteo Garrone there. For me, it was a great opportunity to become the voice of people without voice, to narrate what people didn't see during this journey. So he asked me that he want to make a movie, and I say I have a story that me and my cousin, we decided to leave our country to come to Europe because my dream was to be a soccer player, and my cousin dream was to be a singer. So we decided to travel. We know it was not easier. We have been to prison. I have been sold in like a slave in Libya, and I worked for several months without being paid. So when I got to Italy and I met this register, Matteo Garrone, want to make a movie, I said, this is an opportunity for us to tell to the whole world what we faced before we arrived in Lampedusa, because most of the time, some people did not get a chance to arrive. Some people died in the Mediterranean Sea, in the desert, and I saw with my naked eyes people dying in front of me in the desert. So for me, I contribute telling the real story, writing together, point by point, what we faced during the journey, our difficulties, our doubt, our fears. So for me, it was important to, because Matteo is a register, but he never made this journey. So he said that he want to make a good story, a story that people have to know the real, the truth, because most of the time you only see the boat arriving in Lampedusa on Sicily. So for him, it was important to tell to the whole world the journey, how the journey is made, how people face the journey, how people die during when you were showing the piece of the movie that has been shown right now, in the car, for example, who fell down in the desert may stay in the desert. And we saw many people die in the desert. So for me, this movie helped me to be the voice of migrants, to be the voice of people without voice. So, and I have also to give thanks to Matteo, the register, that also involved me from the beginning to the end.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mamadou. And there can be no doubt that there is nothing that nothing is more powerful and inspiring than hearing lived experiences. Really. So you mentioned fears and dreams. So let us watch another short clip about the movie where we see the two protagonists debating precisely whether to take the journey to Italy or not, and they talk about their dreams and fears. Kat, can we please, thank you.
C'était des pipeaux. Dégloon ci yow. Eh, man ngi may wax ak yow. Da nga ragal wax ko. Waxal da nga ragal. Waxal. Le bu nekkul loolu lan la?
Dama ragal kay, dama ragal.
C'est ça, avoue la. D'accord. Léegi yow Seydou mi doon wax ne daa ko kontaan donc léegi dama 6 mois ñu koy liggéey. Façon liggéey bu nekk liggéey nañ pour dem suñu rêve dans tout ça man wax dëgg yàlla dem man kese duma ko def.
Mais mënuma dem tamit.
Donc alors l'Europe nous attend boy. Tu t'imagines nga nekk stade bu mag doobu xonk cur bu xonkul doo ko signal bu xonk cur ngay signé autographe boy. Podium bu la neex ngay toog di wéy doon star di zikkal la ndax tu t'imagines sourire boy.
Boy, mais yow xam nga ne dama ragal mais yow yaa gën a xam mënuma dem sans yow.
Kee nga gëm dof bee moustache bi gis nga ko.
Man gis naa ko sax mais.
mu doon waxee di fëgg bopp da
moom kay. man
sourire.
man waxuma sax
reetaan.
waaw mais reetaan na mais man waxuma sax loolu mu doon fëggee table bi man moo mooy.
kon xam nga ne wéru.
Non ça même pas sax mais gisoo nu mu doon waxee.
yaa tapet.
Du question de loolu sax du question de tapet. wuy ma balaa boobu nañ am ñu def mën a ñëw
lan loo bëgg ànd jàmm.
waaw man ak yow dinañ am lu ñu def man ak yow dinañ am lu ñu def.
Mamadou, I saw you smiling as you were watching this scene. So if you feel comfortable sharing, can you tell us a little bit more about what were your biggest, or what was your biggest dream and your biggest fears when you decided to leave your country?
First of all, our fears were because we have been told, we took information from people that have tried the journey and they came back in their home. So we went to take information from this guy that was repairing radios and televisions. He told us, don't try this journey because I saw many people dying. And we were afraid, of course. But we were trying, we have decided to travel to go because we were students and that time we were young. So for us, to achieve better life, we have to go to Europe, to Italy. So we were afraid at the same time also to lose our identity, because who is living to lose our identity, because where you are going, you don't know what are you going to meet. To lose your culture, to lose your tradition, to lose your friends, and we don't know if we will be able to come back to see our families again. So we were being at the beginning, we were trying to go, but we afraid a lot. We afraid a lot. But for us, the dream was too much heavier than us, and we were young. So we said, anyway, within 1 week time, because in our mind, we were thinking that within 1 week, we will be in Europe, and we call our friends and our family that we did it. But when we start the journey, during the middle of the desert, the Sahara desert, in the part of Algeria, Niger, and Libya, there we saw many people dying. We saw children, women crying. And there is a part of the film that you people will see a woman that I could not help the woman that was flying. That woman wrote a piece of paper. She gave the piece of paper to me, written the name of his father and the telephone of his parents. He said, in case that you reach in Italy or in Libya, please call my parents and told them that I couldn't make the journey. I couldn't help that woman. So for me, it was fundamental that in the movie, we put this scene. This is the reason why, for me, it was important, because I could never forget that scene. To leave somebody in the middle of the desert that is crying, that could not walk anymore, and she died in the middle of the desert. So these are some of our fears, because seeing some people die in front of you, you fear that you could not make it. But at the same time, for our dream was to be one day to reach in Italy, and start better life, to be a soccer player. And my cousin was saying that maybe if I reach in Italy, I will try to go to London to study, to learn better English. So the dream was more heavy than us, so but it was not easier for us. And that's why at the beginning I said that I'm a lucky person, because through the number of people that were moving, many people, I saw them dying in front of me. So for me, this movie, when Matteo contacted me, I said, I will make the whole world knows what migrants pass through during in the Sahara Desert, and at the same time in the prison in Libya, because I have been in prison for 3 to 4 times, and also how we do it across the Mediterranean Sea. So for me, it is fundamental to explain to the whole world, to explain the journey, because through the journey, it is important to know how people are frightened. And it was important also through this movie, some African youth will know the way people used to suffer in the desert, because we are talking also not all the suffering, but people that are trafficked. We are talking also about human trafficking, that we could not forget, because the Arab people also trafficked human and they sold them. I have been sold, like me and one guy, $500 to work like 3 months without being paid. So for me, it was important to let the whole world know what goes through the desert, the Mediterranean Sea, and in Libya. So, and Matteo helped us to bring on the screen, through cinema, through culture. I think this will be something important for the new generation to know, because the topic of migration is spoken every day in Italy, in Europe, even now in United States. So it's the topic that concerns everybody. So for me, you people choose the real film to make those people to understand really, because all of the time we should not think that people should move because of climate disaster, but some people have also their own dreams. Young people have dreams, so it is important also to decide to travel when, and everybody should be free also when we are talking about human rights. Each from Africa or from Europe, from the United States, every single person should be free to travel and decide to take a decision to leave his country, whatever he likes, and when he wants to go back also. So
thank you, Mamadou. Thank you, merci beaucoup, and please stay with us, because there will be more opportunities to engage in the conversation. And you mentioned the scene of the woman flying. That's so. Let us turn to the movie again. We will be showing a few more clips. They are not in sequence, but they touch upon different themes that you have already mentioned. So they will give us additional food for thought. So it's about 5-6 minutes. Enjoy the view. Kat, please, if you can proceed.
Seydou! Ñu dem wayo!
Madame de Boni, papa. Madame Doubou.
Mais dara do foralan. Gidi baa ngi nii dem. Te bu ñu fi bàyyi ñu des ci désert. Baba Kong.
Madame. Moussa! Madame. Debout. Doucement.
Oh, mon enfant.
Allez. Doucement. Hein?
Moussa! Ma xarit ñu ngi ñëw. Ñu ngi ñëw. Lan dem. Non.
Thank you. Well, very powerful scenes indeed. Some of the scenes that stood up the most, at least with me, when I watched the movie. So let me turn now to our next guest, Marta Foresti. Marta is the founder and CEO of LAGO-COLLECTIVE, which is a collective focused on movement, culture, and the arts that aims to foster new narratives around global migration, amongst many other things. So she's also visiting professor at King's College London and the chair of the Global Creative Economy Council within the British Council. So Marta, thank you very, very much for taking time to be with us today. The scene that we have just watched, in particular, the desert crossing scenes, feel starkly real. And then all of a sudden we see the woman flying, which is surreal and poetic in a way. So can you share with us some reflections on the role of artistic expressions, on the role that art actually can play to shine a light on serious human rights violations and to shape public awareness, and also, I would say, empathy, which is such a rare commodity these days. Over to you, Marta.
Thank you, Isabella, Daniela, and everyone for the invitation and for the opportunity to do this. I was going to start to congratulate Mamadou for the AFCON victory, and then I realized they're actually from Côte d'Ivoire, but let's make it like a West Africa joint triumph, despite all the the criticism and all the stories about that final. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I want to come back to not necessarily to AFCON, but to Africa more broadly and what we just saw. So what we have just seen in this particular bit of the movie is real. It is definitely true and also poetic. The one thing that I cannot stop thinking about as I watch this film, as a film lover like I am, is how utterly beautiful it is. And the beauty is carried across the film. It hits me, from the beginning, the scenes in Senegal, and I didn't want to leave I didn't want to leave Dakar. I wanted to see more of that dance, all the way to the scene that we just watched, in this absolutely beautiful cinematic, moment on the flight of the woman, but also the photography and the shooting of the desert, but actually all the way to the slavery, all the way to the violence, all the way to the boat. Some of the photography and the colors and the aesthetics of the scenes on the boat, for example, I thought were very stunning. And I'm saying this with a deliberate intention of provocation, because I do think that when it comes to the role of the arts and film in dealing with issues related to suffering, to human rights abuses, to injustice, there is a real risk that we diminish the role that arts and films can play by almost assuming that it is a matter of empathy and humanity, and almost like a representation of something, rather than actually a powerful knowledge tool to actually tell a story from a different viewpoint, tell a story that is not there just so that we can feel the empathy, but so that we can actually think differently and learn something and become curious and active. And this could not be more urgent and more important than in the migration debate. Because unlike many other forms of human rights abuses or injustice in the world, as I think Mamadou just mentioned, this is something that is in the news every day. This is something that is almost talked about too much. This is something where everybody's meant to have an opinion. But one of the troubles with that is that the way we talk about the movement of people is incredibly simplistic, and it assumes that there is somebody who leaves and somebody who stays, that there is somebody who has dreams and somebody who doesn't, that there is, that there is a choice, or that there is a border that determines who is in and is out. And you're meant to take side into almost like a tennis game between those in favor and those and those against, rather than actually meaningfully engage with the reality of it and the dilemmas of it, and also frankly the complete nonsense that some of the current policies have put in place in terms of what they do to people's lives, but also to economies and to our sort of collective future. So one of the things that I think beauty does and aesthetics do in relation to this debate is that it almost claim back something that belongs to all of us. Because, as a mother, I find it really difficult to watch this film for two reasons. One is because I work on migration, and almost the last thing I want to do when I have a little bit of time is to watch something that reminds me of some of the challenges and the tragedies and the little hope that there is in some of the things that I'm trying to do in my day-to-day life. But also because I found, almost like the beginning of the film and knowing what these two boys are about to go through, and this very simple but very understandable for me feeling as a mother, the idea that my son could even consider that to try to help me out and to help my life, to just take such a risk and to just put his life in danger and be the victim of such crime is something that I can't even begin to imagine what it will feel like. And interestingly, I was actually rewatching the film, I was thinking of Garrone's previous films. I was thinking about Gomorrah, for example, and the similarities that there are in generations of young people who are stripped of their aspiration and dreams for different reasons and in different contexts. In that case, is because of sort of organized crime in Campania, in the south of Italy, where actually Mamadou now lives. So what I'm trying to say is that there is such a need to almost like claim back that experience, so something that belongs to all of us. Because if there is one thing that the migration debate does day in and day out, is to continuously exploit the otherness, the sense that there is somebody out there that makes this decision, that crosses the desert, who is a migrant that is not me. And the reality is that Mamadou and I share a fundamental experience, which is that at some point in our lives, we both decided to leave home to try and achieve our dreams and pursue, and find a job and maybe, and play football or sing in a band, whatever. But the fundamental difference is that I had the right to do it and Mamadou didn't. And almost like claiming back this simple, powerful story about what unites people across borders, going into that very difficult space of the fact that obviously there are major inequalities and entrenched human rights violations and dysfunctional policy that make this, this connectedness break down, because in reality, Mamadou and I had very different experience in pursuing our dreams, but claiming back the fact that pursuing an aspiration and moving from one country to another in pursuit of that aspiration is something that belongs to humanity and to all of us. And so does that beauty. So does that image of the desert, the colors, the fact that there is aesthetics and beauty in the most tragic of circumstances. I think it's something that film does incredibly powerfully, in my view, particularly so, compared to other forms of art. But again, where we need to really embrace the fact that it goes beyond, the poetics, beyond the empathy, beyond that kind of empathy that we thought perhaps the world could feel after Alan Kurdi died on that beach, and we all saw the image. But the difference is that the film, in the way that there is more than just images, there is the story, there is the narrative, there is the choice, the color palette, the aesthetics, the reverie, the aspiration, all into the beautiful forms that is cinematography. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And it certainly struck me and hopefully many of us from different, in different ways.
Thank you so much, Marta, for sharing these very personal insights. And I couldn't agree more with you on the issue of empathy and going beyond empathy, obviously, and the power of art and the power of storytelling. And I think there will be opportunities later on also to invite other people, including people online, to comment on these, on the power of storytelling. Can you tell us, Marta, a little bit about the work that you do with Lagos, and how do you promote these different narratives, positive narratives around global migration?
Sure. And yes, very much so. So LAGO is something that I started a couple of, hold on, sorry about that. This is typical Zoom scene. So I started LAGO a few years ago because I was very worried. I worked all my life, like many of you, in sort of policy research. In fact, I met Daniela back in the day when we both worked at Save the Children as researchers and advocates. But I come from a human rights background, ended up working on sustainable development for many years, international relations, and that's how I started to work on migration policy. And as a researcher, I was getting really worried about the fact that I was in the business of trying to make the positive case for migration through research and data and all the evidence we have about the wonderful economic benefits of migration for growth, for personal, development, for income, and also on the other hand, to really, show some of the incredible, the terrible consequences of hostile environments and human rights abuses for people on the move. And none of that was working, right? All of that was sort of coming up against a policy discourse and a political narrative that was getting, and in fact, look at where we are today, getting more and more entrenched and more polarized. And it was in part the realization that making the positive case for migration was perhaps not, the smarter choice, or not, not the point in trying to combat a deliberately toxic and artificially negative narrative with something that tries to almost like run after it by, showing the other side, rather than fundamentally offer a different perspective on this reality of the movement of people. And that's when I encountered an information designer called Federica Fragapane, and we did some work back in 2020 around the pandemic, around the role of migrant workers in the response to COVID. And rather than writing a report on that, we turned the data through her beautiful artistic practice into a data visualization called Key Workers. And I was completely struck by the power of design and the power of information design, and Federica's choice of aesthetics and beauty and lines and colors and shapes to tell a completely different story about the value, in that case, of the migrant workers in the COVID response. Not one that will rely just on, obviously not on the numbers or just the fact that we all knew that there were so many foreign-born nurses in our hospital, but something that deliberately used particularly shapes around trees and colors to tell that story. And so from then on, I got very interested in the idea that perhaps there was a different angle, there was a different gaze, and one that would really, not make the case for it, but actually showing rather than telling what talent, what skills, what beauty, what shapes, what sounds, what music, what films, what fashion can do to tell, the story of people coming from different parts of the world and what they can contribute. And so that's a little bit how LAGO was born. And since then, we've done work with artists, particularly with musicians, with designers, with poets, with writers, all actually quite deliberately not trying to tell positive stories about migration, but actually to talk about the beauty of movement, to talk about what people do, to talk about ideas and innovation, to talk about something that is very close to my heart, the African continent, in a way that is deliberately different and alternative to some of the main narratives, which is actually goes back to my first point, which is that opening scenes in Dakar And actually, throughout the desert, and even in the detention camps in Libya, or the beautiful scenes on the walls that's been built, as really almost like claiming back the beauty of the continent and the talent of the people, and make that the story of migration, not the dangerous journeys being the main framing of what this is about. And I am completely blown away by the need that there is, and the demand and the interest of trying to do this rather different, to tell this different story through the power of creativity, the arts, design, and innovation.
Fantastic. Truly inspiring, Marta. And yeah, I'm a firm believer of the power of beauty and art as well. And I'm sure that many people will start Googling LAGO and trying to understand better, to learn more about the work.
Put in the chat just in case, so you don't have to.
And you're getting a few hearts, so that speaks volume. Thank you very much, Marta, again. And let's watch another short clip, which has, I'm afraid, some very disturbing scenes in detention facilities in Libya.
يلا قوم يلا ما وصل قوم محتاج اشخاص j'ai besoin d'un menuisier qui est menuisier vous êtes sûr hein sinon vous allez mourir يلا بسرعه يلا قوم بسرعه يلا ما عندناش وقت كامل يلا j'ai besoin d'un maçon. Maçon, vous êtes sûr? Vous êtes sûr? يلا ما عندناش نهار كامل. ما في أحد.
No comment on this scene. Of course, they are very disturbing. But let me turn now to Steve from MSF. Steve Purbrick is the head of mission for MSF in Libya. A very seasoned humanitarian professional, a strong advocate for humanitarian access and protection in Libya. So Steve, again, great pleasure to have you with us. You are based in, I think you are connecting from Libya. So welcome again. The scene that we have just watched are obviously frightening, right? So can you tell us a bit, can you update us a little bit on the current situation of for migrants in Libya, particularly children, accompanied minors, from the perspective of detention, exploitative labor, and so on. Over to you, Steve.
Sure. Thank you, Isabella. And yes, hopefully my internet should be okay from Tripoli this evening. And apologies if not. What's very striking about this film, in fact, is the reflection of stories we have heard from our patients over and over and over again here in Libya. the scenes in the desert reflect what we hear. People falling from cars and not being picked up, or sometimes, in fact, vehicles crashing entirely, and a number of people being left to die in the desert with injuries. The first scene in detention there, we see people all together, is a scene I've seen firsthand here in Libya, where we have sent teams as well in the official detention centres. The second scene I can't comment on directly, but it's there is industrial scale torture in Libya. And unfortunately, we see videos and photos on a regular basis. What happens is that there are two parallel systems that overlap very heavily. One is the official detention system, where you are mistreated, tortured, traded and sold, and exposed to forced labor and sexual violence, and you pay for your freedom. That's the official version. And then the unofficial version is more or less the same, just that the torture is probably a bit more extreme, and the violence is more systematic and comprehensive. It's very different to make the difference between the official system and then the system run by criminal gangs only, as opposed to the militias, the quasi-official militias who run the nominally official immigration detention centers in Libya. But what we see again is for everyone, we see risks of very high risk of trafficking. We see migrants and refugees arriving in Libya who are held in these torture centers until they pay for their freedom. Families are exposed to a high degree of torture and suffering while they attempt to negotiate the release of their loved ones. And this continues to this day. To answer the first question, in fact, there is no fundamental change in what we are seeing with our patients in Libya, what we're seeing in terms of the treatment of migrants and refugees over a number of years now in Libya, despite hundreds of millions of euros being spent by the European Union and by member states, primarily on reinforcing borders, and yet no real change in the protection or medical care of migrants. We as MSF, we are a medical humanitarian organization. So we are trying to provide medical care in this context, which at times is extremely depressing because we cannot change the fundamental circumstances, the fundamental causes, and often our medical teams are confronted with the fact that they treat patients only for them to be discharged and to be do highly vulnerable again. I can't stress enough how much from Mamadou's story, how much I've heard previously. The stories of people spending several years in Libya to be imprisoned, sold, of forced labor, and to spend times going in and out of prison over and over again. Not the prison or detention centers or trafficking networks. Again, there is an industrial scale torture for ransom system in Libya. It is migrant bodies and refugee bodies are a commodity in Libya as well. And we see, as our patients, we see migrants and refugees with those injuries, whether physical or psychological. In fact, the psychological impacts we can do very little about here in this context. It's not appropriate. We can do essentially some psychological first aid and not much more because of the conditions of abuse here in Libya. And just to bounce off some of the other panelists already, because I can confirm we see the same thing. It is modern. We see a modern slave trade here in Libya, as Isabel highlighted, and the economy around migrants and migrant bodies is based on exploitation. Migrants are an essential part of the Libyan economy. In fact, migrants are doing a lot of the labor that the Libyans don't want to do themselves, and not even, let's say, unskilled labor, for want of a better term, but a lot of the manual labor that Libyans don't want to do. And the migrants themselves there is work, and that is one reason there are a number of people come to Libya just to work, not necessarily to cross the Mediterranean. But the conditions are very poor, and the exploitation is systematic. there are a couple of points too. We do see significant numbers of unaccompanied minors, and as Daniela highlighted, they are typically boys, teenage boys, 14, 15, 16, 17. The problem here in Libya that we see is that there is very limited child protection services available. There's very little specialized services available. There is no asylum system in Libya, and UNHCR is highly limited in what they can offer to asylum seekers or refugees, even if they are unaccompanied minors. UNICEF has a very limited, if not absent, role regarding the care for unaccompanied minors, despite the obvious protection risks, particularly in a case like Libya, where there is such systematic violence and lack of protection available. And most critically, there is very limited funding for NGOs and for UN to do that care work, to do that child protection work, to do the medical care work in Libya. The funding primarily goes towards supporting the reinforcement of borders and to support the monitoring of boats at sea, to provide training for the Libyan Coast Guard, who are just militias. There are no institutions in Western Libya, no matter what people might try and tell you. There are just fragmented groups, fragmented control. It's very difficult to affect change. To come back to the question of unaccompanied minors, we as MSF, we are constantly confronted with providing care for unaccompanied minors in cases where it's very difficult to navigate questions of consent by unaccompanied minors, even for simple acts of medical care. We can sometimes contact families remotely, but that also is challenging. Sometimes we can reunite people in Libya. Sometimes we have reunited unaccompanied minors with their siblings who are also unaccompanied minors. These are very difficult choices regarding child protection. That is absolutely the limits of our capacity. We are a medical organization. We are confronted with these child protection challenges as a secondary effect of providing medical care. There is no particular system to take care of unaccompanied minors in Libya, and there are complex needs. Some, as we saw with the example in the film, the idea that some minors are coming in search of a better life for themselves or for their families. Some are paid for by the families, and therefore turning back is not an option. And that's difficult because when some people who are trying to reach Europe are intercepted at sea, then they put back in detention. So they pay for a boat already, and then they need to pay to get out of detention. And the cycle reproduces. And that's why people circle between imprisonment and the general community in Libya. We have been in a position in the past where we have attempted to negotiate and to prioritize the release of minors from detention centers. And Libya is a funny place in the sense that it is possible based on good relationships, it is possible to advocate for the releases of unaccompanied minors, and we have succeeded in the past to convince the authorities that they should not. But at other times, we see there are regular stories of women delivering in hospital and then being taken back to detention. So mothers with newborn babies detained simply because of their status, without any compassionate alternative. There is no difference made by the Libyan authorities when detaining migrants either to not detain unaccompanied migrants. The EU, with some fanfare, was pushing quite hard for a women's and children's detention centre in Tripoli a few years ago. And you can see a report that we published back in 2023 regarding the conditions we found inside. Without being too cynical, nothing had changed compared to how that centre was before it was a dedicated women and children's centre. And all of this happens with the support of the European Union and the European states. They know full well what is happening. They know full well who their partners are, and we do not see any change.
Thank you, Steve, for your very honest I mean, I think you have alluded already. I can feel, and I'm sure others can feel the same. Your frustration about not seeing the structural issues being addressed, really. And you alluded to some of those structural issues and the politics, the exploitation economy behind the violations that we have been talking about. And that's a perfect segue to our next speaker, Elham Saudi, who is the executive director of Lawyers for Justice in Libya, an NGO dedicated to promoting human rights and the rule of law in Libya. And she's an international lawyer specializing in human rights law and IHL, international humanitarian law. So welcome to you, Elham, as well. So Steve has drawn our attention, as I said, to the human rights situation of migrants in Libya, but obviously these violations are not happening in a vacuum, right? So the question is, the next logical question is, who benefits from the migration economy in Libya, and how do politics, the Italian politics, the EU, European EU member states politics, contribute to or reinforce these dynamics? So in other words, what are the real political and economic interests sustaining this business in
Libya? Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak, and thank you, Mamadou, for your beautiful vulnerability in allowing us to share in your story. I think I will start by, Steve has obviously alluded to the various actors that are part of this story, and I think I would start by making two clear points. This is an economy and this is a business, and therefore there is sort of many benefactors and many beneficiaries, along the lines. And I think what I would like to spend my time talking about, given our audience, is the legal framework that is looking at this, and then also the political interests. Steve talked about, how the official and unofficial systems and how there's not much difference between them. In fact, there's quite a lot of crossover in the actors. And what we also see is that those who are involved in the trafficking are those who are also involved in the interceptions and return. And so it's quite a circular model. And if we look at the reasons for that, I think there is several. And, one of the most motivating elements is that it is a lucrative business, and it is a business that is given absolute impunity by those in Libya, but also by those on the other side of the Mediterranean, and enabled by those on the other side of the Mediterranean. The Libyan Coast Guard is significantly funded by European states and by Frontex as an EU entity, supported by them, including through technology and monitoring of boats, and giving the Libyan Coast Guard the right information they need to intercept before any boat gets into European waters to ensure that people go back. In this film, we see that the journey is made in one go. Our experience is people often have to go, several times to be able to make the journey to Europe, because they get intercepted, return to detention, spend more months there, then get on another boat and go back. And actually, in a recent piece of research we did, the average was 4 times doing that boat before you make it to Europe. And a lot of that data is provided by European actors to ensure that there is no conflict, in the sense of people reaching European waters and then there's a burden to save them. And that is the Libyan Coast Guard's bread and butter, is the interceptions. I think the other point I will say is, a lot of the comments that have been made around the trafficking and around that there's no asylum system in Libya, all of that makes Libya incredibly attractive to Europe, because there is no basis on which people can then build legal cases and make legitimate claims for anything. They don't exist, and therefore they're difficult for Europeans to quantify. They're difficult for Europeans to really be held accountable for. And if we talk about some legal cases that have been, I think one of the things we're seeing is this deliberate use of smuggling as the crime that's being prosecuted whenever something happens in Libya, as opposed to trafficking. And I think I make that distinction because that is a distinction that also the Europeans are making. What they want to be telling as a story is about this is smuggling and this is illegal and this is people who are breaching laws to come to us, and it becomes a story about containment. Trafficking becomes a story about abuse. And so the first one means you're going after perpetrators and you forget the victims. If we can configure this as trafficking, which is what it is, then the story becomes about the violations, and most of the violations that are shown in this film and others that go beyond them in real life would amount to crimes against humanity. And the Europeans are not addressing that. In fact, there's a recent Dutch case that we're legitimately celebrating because two Eritrean traffickers have been indicted, but actually, we intervene as an organization to try and get the crimes that are being prosecuted to include crimes against humanity and trafficking and slavery. But we weren't successful in convincing the Dutch prosecutors to do that because smuggling sticks more to the agenda of Europe, which is that this is a commercial problem and not a human rights problem. And I think the other thing I'll just add on that is you will hear from European actors that they are, trying to remedy this by training the Coast Guard. And I think Steve mentioned that. We had a look at one of these training sessions, and there is one slide on human rights violations in a 2-day training. So it comes down to less than 2% of the content. And so there is absolute tokenism in all of this. So I think if we look at the reasons for this, it's actually quite straightforward. This is a containment policy, and Libya is the perfect partner because it's a country with complete impunity, as a fundamentally xenophobic country, which makes it easy to have your policies externalized there. And I can pick up some more examples of that if you'd like, but I'm conscious of time and I really want to make sure that the audience has a chance to speak.
Thank you so much. And thank you also for bringing with such clarity bringing in the conversation the legal perspective and also the accountability perspective. And it's so disheartening to hear that the human rights aspects make only 2% or maybe even less of a whole training module. But let us turn back to the film just for a few last short clips that can help us wrapping up the conversation. So yeah, let's proceed.
C'est lui.
Ok. Assieds-toi. Comment tu t'appelles?
Seydou.
Seydou.
Oui.
Il n'y a même pas pour une personne.
Mais moi, j'ai seulement ça.
Tu as que ça, hein? Tiens, reviens quand tu as le reste.
Mais s'il vous plaît, il faut m'aider. Moi, j'ai seulement ça et mon frère est gravement blessé. Et on doit forcément partir.
De quel âge, toi?
16 ans.
16 ans?
Oui.
Écoute-moi, tu as une solution. Si jamais tu conduis le bateau, je t'emmène toi et ton ami pour le même prix.
Bateau?
Ouais.
Mais moi, j'ai jamais conduit un bateau. Je sais même pas nager.
C'est pas un problème. Je vais t'apprendre à conduire le bateau. C'est très facile. Une journée, tu arrives en Italie.
Une journée, on sera en Italie?
Oui, une journée. C'est toujours tout droit. Tout droit. En plus, toi, mineur, si la police t'attrape là-bas, tu risques pas grand-chose.
Mais c'est pas forcément qu'on m'attrape.
Non. Si quand tu vois la police, tu restes pas à côté de la cabine, il n'y a pas de problème.
C'est facile.
Ouais, c'est très facile. Écoute, j'ai pas le temps. Si tu veux partir avec ton ami, c'est la seule solution. Sinon, moi, je vais prendre quelqu'un d'autre.
Ouais.
Ouais? C'est bon? Ok.
Mais boy. Mais boy, dañuy dem. Dugal ñu dem.
Dem fan.
Boy, Europe mu ngi xaar.
Comme?
Boy, dañuy dem Italie boy. Ñu mën a faj sa tànk bi boy. Yóbbu la si hôpital. Ba pare boy ñu mën a woo suñu yaay ne ñu ngi si jàmm. Ba pare boy ñu mën a toog boy à l'aise.
Léegi yow foo jëlee xaalis bi.
Boy non loolu du problème boy. Xaalis bi matul de mais boy daa am benn waay bu ma jàngal ni ñuy dawalee bato. Boy tu t'en rends compte ni ñuy dawalee bato boy.
Léegi yow wax ma léegi yow mënoo fii ba pare mu dinaa da ngay daw.
Boy boy loolu kaa de nee na il suffit seulement boy xoolal nga téye baar bi nii direct ba Italie. Amico mio. Tu sei pronto? Boy jugal ñu dem boy dama dégg Italie ay ba bene ay non c'è problema. Mamma mia. Jugal ñu dem.
Gata nga. Naa ko mën.
Waaw jugal ñu.
Yeah.
Boy amatul temps amatul.
Cazzo!
Non,
Well, again, some very, very powerful scenes. And let me remind everyone that these are non-professional actors. So let me now welcome our last distinguished guest, Mikiko Otani. Mikiko is a commissioner of ICJ, International Commission of Jurists, and former chair of the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child from 2021 to 2023. an international human rights lawyer with extensive experience on family law and children's rights. Welcome, Mikiko, and thank you for your patience. You are the last one to talk to us. In one of the clips at the very beginning, we clearly see how criminals are manipulating young people to support your trafficking business, and Elham alluded already to this issue. ICJ recently held a workshop in Brussels to discuss the procedural safeguards for migrant children and asylum seekers. And so my question to you is, if you can briefly tell us what procedural safeguards practically matter most in protecting the rights of migrant children, particularly unaccompanied minors. And if you could also mention some of the key child rights concerns that the Committee on the Rights of the Child has identified in state practices towards migrant children. What is the key jurisprudence in that regard? Over to you, Mikiko.
Thank you very much, Isabel, and thank you for this opportunity to be part of this conversation together with Mamadou and the other speakers. Yes, so let me start briefly by introducing the CRC committee for those who are not familiar with that, because most of the my talk is based on the work of the CRC committee. The CRC committee is created to monitor how states implement obligations to realize child rights under the convention, UN Convention on the Right of the Child. So it reviews the country reports, adopts the general comments to provide the guidance to the states on specific themes, and makes decisions on individual complaints and conduct inquiry. So most relevant to the conversation today, in 2017, the CRC committee, together with the Committee on the Migrant Workers, adopted the general comment on migrant children. There, the committee described how wide range of the child rights are seriously affected in the migrant situations. Already alluded by Isabel and also Daniela, the children on the move, fleeing violence, poverty, disasters in home countries, taking dangerous journeys by sea or land, go through so many risks and experience violations of rights in the countries of origin, transit, and destination. At any point during the migratory process, a child's rights to life and survival may be at stake. It could be due to the organized crimes, violence in refugee camps, detention center, pushback, interception operations, excessive use of force of border authorities, refusal of vessels to rescue them, or extreme conditions of travel and limited access to basic services. Unaccompanied and separate children may face further vulnerabilities and can be more exposed to risks. The migrant process can pose risks to children, including physical harm, psychological trauma, marginalization, discrimination, xenophobia, and sexual and economic exploitation, trafficking already highlighted, family separation, detention, and the deportation to the countries where they will be put in serious dangers. So the obstacles that children may face in gaining access to education, adequate housing, sufficient safe food and water, or health services, which are all guaranteed under the Convention on the Rights of the Child, can negatively affect the physical, mental, spiritual, moral, and social development, which itself is a right of the children. The CRC committee has developed jurisprudence by adopting specific recommendations in review of the country reports, decisions on individual complaint cases and inquiry, in addition to the general comments. The committee articulated its positions on many important issues concerning the rights of the children and clarified what are the obligations of the states on such issues as detention, age determination, non-deferment, and school enrollment. I'd like to highlight two issues now from the jurisprudence of the CRC committee. One is detention, and it's a deprivation of liberty, which is a right of the child under the convention. And the other issue is age determination. So let's start with the talk about the detention. So the committee said in the general comment, the immigration detention of children would conflict with the principle of the best interest of the child and the right to development due to the harm inherent in any deprivation of liberty and the negative impact that immigration detention can have on children's physical and mental health and on their development, even when they are detained for a short period of time or even with their families. But we should be reminded that all children's rights under the Convention on the Rights of the Child are guaranteed to children, every human being below the age of 18 years, as defined in Article 1 of the Convention. Thus, the age determination is so fundamental for guarantee of all children's rights, including the right to the best interest of the child, which is the basis for prohibition of detention, as I mentioned. So just to describe how challenging situation children, in particular unaccompanied migrant children, are faced. Often they don't have the authentic identity documents such as passport. They don't speak the language of the country they arrive. They get questions. They don't know their rights guaranteed as children. They don't know about the immigration procedures, age determination procedures, or how to protect themselves in such procedures. They don't have lawyers. They don't know how to appoint lawyers. The consequences are when they cannot prove that they are minors under the 18 years old, they are treated as adults and due to their undocumented status are put into the detention. Children suffer going through age determination procedures, fear, abuse, trauma, but their rights as children, their best interests, not given consideration, not heard at all, and not in a child-friendly way. So not being recognized as children affect their asylum procedures and immigration cases against them for deportation. The children may be deported and sent back to other countries or their home countries, being at the risk to serious violation of human rights upon return. So let me quote a very powerful and important paragraph from one of the committee's decision on immigration cases. The determination of the age of young persons who claim to be a minor is of fundamental importance, as the outcome determines whether that person will be entitled to protection by the states as a child. Similarly, and this point is of vital importance to the committee, the enjoyment of the rights set out in the convention flows from that determination. I mean, age determination. It is therefore imperative that there be due process to determine a person's age as well as opportunity to challenge the outcome through an appeal process. While that process is underway, the person should be given the benefit of the doubt and treated as a child. Accordingly, the committee considers that the best interest of the child should be a primary consideration throughout the age determination process. So you asked me what are the procedural safeguards, in particular in this kind of situation. So the committee clarified actually the best interest of the child, giving some primary consideration, and also the rights of the child to be. Those two rights, as I said, are key safeguards for the all substantive rights of the children. So I'd like to also highlight from the committee's jurisprudence, for the effective exercise of the children's right to be heard, children must have the right to access information and the right to legal assistance. Accessing information at all procedures on the rights, procedures, decisions, and the implication of the decisions, possibility and procedures of appeal, and also remedies, all in the language children can understand. So for this languages part, also it is critically important as a procedural rights to be provided free interpretation and translation. And even with the language children can understand, it has to be explained in a way that children fully understand as their rights. So the free legal aid to have a legal representations provided by the specially trained specialized lawyer is also very important procedural rights. Finally, I wanted to say, I'm sorry for my throat. The committee highlight the importance of appointment of the guardian, particularly for the unaccompanied children. Committee said that guardians are the key procedural safeguards for unaccompanied migrant children, saying that the state party should appoint a qualified legal representative with the necessary linguistic skills for all young persons claiming to be minors as soon as possible on arrival and free of charge. The provision of the representative for such persons during the age determination process is an essential guarantee of respect for their best interest of the child and the right to be heard. Failure to do so implies the violation of Articles 3 and 12 of the Convention, which means the best interest of the child and the right of the child to be heard. So this age determination process is a starting point for the application of the Convention, and thus the absence of timely representation in two ways. First of all, with the legal representation, legal assistance provided by the lawyer, but for the unaccompanied migrant children, the guardianship is a key. So those the representation and assistance is key. And if the states fails to provide those safeguards, it will result in the substantive injustice. So finally, let me finish my contribution by sharing the quote from, again, the committee's jurisprudence. Committee said, committee considers that the children shouldn't be required to explicitly request interim measures of protection, during the age determination procedures, as this is an ex officio obligation of the state parties in view of the particular vulnerability of unaccompanied migrant children. Sorry for my voice.
No worries. Thank you very much, Mikiko, for being with us. And are you in Japan now?
No, I am in New York now. Traveling.
Okay, thanks God. All right, so I mean, it's very clear from your intervention, Mikiko, that there is a very sound, a very solid legal framework to protect the rights of migrant children. Obviously, the question is implementation, and so we all need to monitor very closely how states will comply with those legal provisions and comments and advisory opinions by the Committee on the Rights of the Child. And I think we are all concerned that the new pact on the new EU Pact on Migration and Asylum may result in some violations of those basic rights. We are running a little bit out of time, so allow me just as a way to wrap up this conversation, and before opening up the floor for questions or comments from those of you online, to ask a last question to all our panelists, and it's really a sort of soundbite style intervention, 30 seconds. And the question is, if you had just one message for policymakers after watching Io Capitano, what would that one message be? So Marta, I see you first on the screen, so would you like to come in first?
Sure. I don't know why my screen doesn't pin, but anyway, so I'm assuming we're talking about policymakers in charge of border management and control. I would suggest that they reach out and find allies, people, policymakers in sectors that have a stake in the movement of people that need talented workers in their supply chain, football promises in their grassroots club, and really build almost like a policy partnership around what needs to be done about the reality of the movement of people, to contrast the toxic political narrative that I'm sure a lot of policymakers find very challenging to live with, because they obviously need to respond to it. So yes, find allies beyond the migration sector that can help develop more rational as well as obviously humane policy choices.
Thank you, Marta. I love the idea of partnerships beyond the usual ones. Mamadou, and first of all, Mamadou, thank you so much. And as I think Elham said, thank you for your beautiful vulnerability. That's the way she put it. So what would be your message, Mamadou, in 30 seconds?
Thank you to all of you that listen to this debate, also at the same time talking about migration this time, because what we are seeing, even though the film has passed 2 years ago, right now people are facing the same situation in USA, and it can be also in some part of Africa, all over the world. So for me, it is important through this film that could be an instrument to change the mentality of every people, the politician, also to give opportunity to give all the people to be equal on earth. So for me, I think I want to greet all of you that have chosen this film, this movie, and show it to the students, to the other people, the professors that join the line, and hoping that we can build better future for this generation. This is our wish.
Thank you, Mamadou, and welcome to your little boy. We can see him behind you. And ciao, Steve. What would be your message? 30 seconds message.
I think might be quite short. It doesn't have to be this way. I speak on a very, let's say, pragmatic humanitarian sense. There's no reason why there can't be, for example, adequate medical care in Libya, particularly of minors. There's no reason. This is simply deliberate barbarity as a policy choice. There is no reason why we have to have this system of militarized borders either. So there are things that can be done to address the causes, let's say, but also to render a very difficult situation more humane. Both of things are possible. These are not easy, but they are not particularly complicated solutions either.
Yes, absolutely. It's deliberate barbarity, and yes, it can be and should be fought against. Elham.
This is a choice. This is a choice, and I think we're in a. I'm going to answer a slightly different question. I know that's annoying as a host, so bear with me. But I think, honestly, with the current world we're in, this is also about realizing that change and real change tends to come from the bottom up, and it's also about building movements. and showing solidarity, and not relying on politicians solely to change this. So I think this is about movement building and solidarity, and we all have a choice in this.
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why we are here together today. Thank you. Mikiko, last but not least.
Thank you. I would say that all the migrant children must be treated as the children who are entitled to all child rights under the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It means that policymakers, decision makers have to have the best interest of the child as a primary consideration and ensure the children be heard. This should apply to the decisions concerning individual migrant children's cases, but also the policy decisions which affect the whole migrant children as a group. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikiko. And let me now open, we have about 15 minutes, if you can still bear with us, and we can open up for questions, so feel free to use the Q&A box to write down your question that you can address to any of the panelists, or just take the floor to share reflections, perspective. If there is anything that really stood out for you or challenge your thinking, it is your turn now. There is a question, I guess, for Elham, who is the training of Coast Guard, that I think you you're muted.
Yeah, I couldn't hear you well, but I said the question in the Q&A about the Coast Guard.
Yeah, who does the training?
It was supplied by Frontex.
All right.
So Frontex is sorry, for those who might not be familiar, is the EU border agency.
Okay, thank you. And there is another comment, it's more a comment than a question, welcoming this type of conversations. So thank you very much for that comment. And we hope to be able to continue having those conversations. Of a former UNICEF colleague, how can we contribute to building a movement on these issues, particularly in Africa? I don't know, Marta, if you want to take this one.
I'll try. Well, obviously, it's a big question, and I'm sure others, and particularly Mamadou, might have ideas. I think we can think of a movement in different ways. One is what also we heard from Elham about the importance of recognizing sort of the bottom-up potential of movement and people coming together. But the other one, which I think is a movement coming from African policymakers, states, business people, is that there is a real moment of power in the continent, or rather, there is definitely a diminishing power in the so-called West. There are all sorts of, new landscapes around, new partners for African countries, and the pressure to put demands on what the continent needs, and making sure, for example, I work a lot on visas, to make sure that visas are part of conversation about trade agreements, and to really, obviously there is on the one hand the demand on African continent to take repatriations from so-called irregular migrants from different parts of the world. But on the other hand, I think Africa has a stronger hand than it ever did in terms of negotiating what works for itself. And I think continuously put the movement of people on the agenda, and visas and regular pathways as part of global debates and negotiations is something that we should all pay attention to and actually support, and create transversal alliances with those who have an interest in supporting African countries in doing so, which are largely not going to be in the West, but probably, I hate the terminologies around the global South, but probably specifically around countries in Latin America, South Asia, and beyond. So I think African countries have a lot more power to at least, not let this, go any further than it currently does.
Thank you so much, Marta. And I can see there are other comments, and I'm not going to read them in the interest of time, but I hope that they can be still seen when we will be sharing the recording of the event. Here is a question. I wanted to ask how you think we can mobilize the power of academic work and research to contribute to movement building and grassroots transforming knowledge production in the human rights field. So I don't know, perhaps Carla, you may want to comment on this one.
Thank you, Isabella. And I would just like to say that the more that we can find pathways to collaborate between different disciplines, the better. We're always trying to collaborate with civil society. I collaborate all the time with Elham and Lawyers for Justice in Libya, for example, and we need to build on those collaborations because academic work serves an important purpose, but I would say it can best be served when we connect with communities that we're investigating, analyzing, and supporting. So I think building partnerships which go across different sectors is really important, particularly when we're all focused on issues like human dignity and dignifying all people in the process.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Can I add? I think there's also other ways in which this could be, in building on what Carla was saying, I would say two things. One is, solidarity is about deference. And so I think that when we're talking about dialogue, I think when we're talking about standing in solidarity, it's also by standing in solidarity in the way that we're told to stand in solidarity by those impacted. I think sometimes there is a perception that we can decide on the form of solidarity as those who are outside the situation. So I think there needs to be much more centering of the right voices in these conversations. And I exclude myself from that. I don't, I would have liked the composition of this gathering to look significantly different, to have centered the more important voices than myself. The second thing I think is there's also ways in which to support those on those journeys through academic institutions by providing opportunities for scholarship for those that who are making those journeys and who perhaps could find alternative legal routes through academia as well. And so we work a lot with people that we support in terms of trying to get them scholarships as well as other ways of getting to Europe in a safer way and one that honors their dignity and also their talent.
Thank you so much.
Can I also come in on this one to share something very practical?
Sure.
I put the link in the chat. This is a program at King's College of 4 fully funded, talking about scholarship, 4 fully funded scholarships for a PhD scholarship under the title African Creativity Beyond Borders. And one of those PhD, or one option, is around mobility and borders and facilitating the movement, particularly of African creatives. And it's just an example of how these issues can also be put on the agenda of others. Like there is a real opportunity to make sure that in academia, scholars that work on different issues, in this case on the African creative economy, can really also engage in a conversation about how fundamental human mobility is to that. And so it's just an example, and we're going to collaborate in delivering that one of these PhDs. But it's just a very concrete example of a scholarship being made available.
Thank you, Marta and Elham. I know that we could say there is much more to say, but I am trying to give as much space as possible to other people online. And I can see that there are a few more comments in the Q&A. But before addressing them, I would like to take the opportunity. We have Alice Argento attending. I can't see her name, but I believe she's online. And she's a lawyer from Palermo, Sicily, who is working directly with unaccompanied and separated children. So, Alice, if you're still online, would you like to take the floor for a few minutes?
Hi, yes, I'm still online.
Oh, wonderful. So please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you everybody for this interesting afternoon. I was listening to you while during all the time. As you said, I'm a lawyer. I work here in Sicily as a lawyer, but even as a legal guardian for accompanied children that arrive in Italy. I was while you were speaking, I was thinking about two topics that I would like to share with you, like just thoughts about it. First of all, is the first thing that I thought when I saw this film that is very interesting and amazing, but I think even that it is a big missing opportunity because this gives us this leaves us with a big question of what happens after. Because we here in Sicily we met a lot of Capitano, no? A lot of young guys who arrive here and they just drove the boat, no? To for the same reason that we saw in the film. I don't need to explain it. But then what happens when they arrive? It's not just so nice as we could think, no? Because very often they are considered like human traffickers and smugglers, and they are even minors, no? They are put in prison, and I would have loved to see this film end with the truth, because it's a sad truth that people then are not free, no? They could have even saved a lot of people to let them arrive on our shores, but in any way they are not free in the end because they are criminalized for what they did. And I would have I really wanted to share this thought with you before starting with the other topic. As I said, I work with a lot of unaccompanied children, and I heard you saying that more or less they are young adolescents, males adolescents. But as I said last time that I was talking to Daniela, we are seeing that they are arriving always and always younger, no? If before we were seeing children, we were seeing unaccompanied minors that were like 16, 17. Now we are seeing children that are arriving alone. And there are two kinds of children that arrive alone. Some of them, for example, they arrive from Egypt or Somalia or Eritrea, and they are under 14 years old and they were traveling alone. But many others are separated children, and they have been separated during the journey. I'm working with a lot of them, and when I say children, I really mean from 0 to 14, no? There were children, they were just 6 months old, and they were not able to say who were the parents. Luckily, in some cases, the people that arrive with them are able to say the name and to give us the number of the parents from which they've been separated. And this sometimes it happens on the road, on the desert, in Algeria or in Libya. Sometimes it happens when they are going on the boat, no? This becomes very terrific when it happens from Libya, because very often it happens to people that come from Tunisia. But when it happens from Libya, it's even more difficult to find the parents. We have these numbers that people give us to look for the mothers and the fathers, and we keep on calling these numbers with no responses, because in that cases, usually they have just been kidnapped and brought to the prisons. So we don't find them for years. Now, I found this year a woman that I was looking since 4 years. And now she's in Tunisia. Her son is being adopted in Italy because he was just 1 year old. We waited for 1.5 years. We didn't find her. But we found her now because she went to the Red Cross in Tunisia. And now we don't know what actually we can do, because she's in Tunisia. The son is adopted here. And it's been a long time. We are thinking to understand what to do. I went to meet her in Tunisia, but we still don't know how to go on. In some other cases,
Alice, may I just ask you to bring your intervention to an end, because I'm afraid we are running out of time just for this week. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, it's finished because that was part of a big story that we see every day. Sometimes we are able to find the family in time, sometimes we don't, or sometimes we never find them. And it would have been even good to start like a cooperation, as I said to Daniela, no? Even to communicate when we look for people. Sometimes with MSF, we have already done it. That's why I think that probably I've already spoken with Elham on the phone sometimes for some cases, I remember. But would have been great to be able to work all together always more and more. And just thank you.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Very, very, very important points. And actually, on the point you make about the ending of the movie, which is a little romanticized in a way, I think Daniela will be able to complement with some information. I see that there is a comment also from Rana Katzkatz, who happens to be also a friend of mine. She's a Syrian-American award-winning filmmaker and professor of narrative filming at the American University in Doha. And Rana, if you are still with us, I was looking at your homepage earlier today, and there is a quote from Nigerian writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie that really caught my attention, which says, stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. You are teaching narrative filmmaking and storytelling. So can you just say a few words about the power of storytelling through filmmaking? Yeah, I don't know. Probably Rana is not online anymore. But that's okay. We will. I would still encourage you, perhaps, to look at the homepage where there is more information about narrative storytelling. There is another question from Laurent about promising experiences engaging with the private sector in Europe to help influence policies and practices around migration. So I don't know if there is any of our panelists who would like to respond with some concrete advice on places where we can find more information on this particular issue.
Sadly, Isabella, I think our time has run out. So I think we're going to need to close.
Sure.
It's been such a fabulously interesting panel, and thank you to you especially for chairing and trying to get as much content as we can into the discussion. And I'd like to thank also all of the speakers, and particularly Mamadou and your son, for joining us and for sharing your experiences with us. It's been really a pleasure. The film is so wonderful. And for those of you who haven't yet had a chance to watch it, it's very easily accessible online. If my colleague Kat is there, she can share now a few examples of where you can see it online. You can get it through YouTube. It's the link is going to be shared right now. So if you look in the Q&A, you should be able to see the link to where it's going to be shared. This webinar, this discussion, this session will be put together and made available online in the coming period in about a week or so. So we will share that with all of the participants. I also wanted to encourage you to follow us, to join future activities. This is the second event that we've had in this series, and we hope to have more, and we plan to have more. So stay tuned to us. And thank you so much once again to Isabella, to Daniela, and to all of you who've joined us online, and to our panelists. Wishing you a great end of day.
Thank you.